Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's start the day off by giving charity. Here, please excuse the delay. Good. Now, charity brings all good things. We need Mashiach desperately, and any second it's going to happen. Now, here we go. So we're discussing what exactly happened when God destroyed Sodom and Amorah. And he destroyed Sodom and Amorah. And before that, he said, I will go down and see according to the cries that are coming up to me. They're coming to me, what's going on down there? Why are these screams coming up to me? God said, I'll come down. And the Rebbe said, why does it say this in the Torah? What does it mean God will come down? What does it mean he'll come down? What does that mean? I mean, isn't God everywhere? That's the God of Israel. He creates everything. He's not limited to being up in heavens. He's everywhere. So what does it mean he'll come down? Oh. So the Rebbe starts to explain, here we have a very deep secret, which is the essence of Jewish faith. And Jewish faith is that God is one, that everything we see, everything there is, all the worlds are all being created. But nevertheless, this world is very, very important to God. Very important. And God reacts to this physical world. But nevertheless, the physical world does not really exist as a true existence. It's a created existence. And there's all these other worlds which are above it, all these dimensions, which are also created existences, which show us how far away we are from the truth. And then the Rebbe goes and explains, but all these levels are also truth. They're also just levels of truth. Levels of truth, but it's watered down. It's like I said before, like you tell a child he doesn't know what it means. The 2 and 2 is 4. So you give him 2 apples and 2 more apples, and he realizes there's 4. But apples are not mathematics. Apples are not mathematics. The same thing. This world is an example of what God is, but it's not real reality. Oh, but on the other hand, God is creating it, and God's not doing it to fool us. Why would God create all these things? So he says the reason God is creating it is in order that we can have like a ladder. We can little by little come to realize what a miracle it is that God creates us, and even a bigger miracle that God reacts to us. So the Rebbe up to now explained all these Kabalistic terms about the tzimtzum and the kav, how God hid his light, and then he made a new beam of light, and then the world of Atzilut, and then he concealed it, made veils, and these veils are something like a metaphor, and etc., so that we come finally down to this world. Okay, so this is all this information that the Rebbe is giving us, and all of these details about the upper worlds. This comes from a statement that Elijah the prophet made, and it's in the beginning of the Zohar. So let me show you this. Let me show the statement here. I brought this thing up here. Watch this. Here we go. This is the statement. Ptach Eliyahu, that Elijah the prophet began, and he said, he's speaking to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Ribon Olmin, master of the worlds. This is in Aramaic. It's Aramaic because the Jewish people went into exile into Babylon. That was when the second temple was destroyed. So everybody was speaking. The first temple was destroyed. So when the first temple was destroyed, so all the Jews went into Babylon. First temple was destroyed. They were in Babylon 70 years, but a lot of Jews remained in Babylon and speak Babylonian, Aramaic. That was like the street language of the Jews. It became like the big popular language of the Jews. And that's when the Talmud was written. The Talmud was written, 500 years after the first destruction of the temple, 500-600 years after the destruction of the first temple. But nevertheless, people were still speaking Aramaic. That was the language of the Talmud, and that was the language of the Zohar. So here we got the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the big the stars also of the Talmud, but he was also the big star of Kabbalah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He wrote the book the Zohar. It's like about 1,800 years ago. Okay, so Elijah the prophet comes and talks to him, and he says, Ribon Olmin, master of the worlds. Let me give him my point over here. Master of the worlds, you are one, but not a numerical one. Remember, that's what we learned before. This is talking about how God comes into the world of Atzilut. Antu, you are ilot, you are the cause of all causes. Stima, called steaming. You are the concealed of all concealed. In other words, all the upper worlds, you're concealed from even the highest worlds. There is no thought that can grasp in you at all. Good. We didn't. This he didn't bring this in the in what we're learning. Okay, this he did bring. Antu, you are the one, the apikas that you emanated. Eser tikunim, 10 fixings, 10 sphirot we talked about. That's talking about Atzilut. A Karina alone, and they're called Eser, missing here a letter. Eser Sphirin. Let's see, this maybe I made it too big. Let's make it a little smaller. Here, one second. No, for some reason it wasn't printed here. No, it's not printed. Okay. They're called, and you call them Eser Sphirin. The resh is missing here. So the line is really continues on, but it's only printed up here. Okay. Eser Sphirin. You call them 10 Sphirot. La'ana Gabahan all means steaming, the lowest column. And with these 10 Sphirot, these 10 aspects of your personality, you conduct with them worlds that are concealed, that are not revealed, and worlds that are revealed. Revealed and concealed, that's it's a relative statement, relative description, because the worlds that are lower, they're called revealed, and the worlds that are above them are called concealed. So anytime you have in one world, whatever world, the world of Bria, whatever it is, the world Bria, for instance, is concealed from everything below it, but it's revealed in regarding to everything above it. Okay. Anyways, there's all these worlds that are concealed, and you are concealed from people. Okay, you link them all together. Ready? Here we go. And the Elon Esesphiron, and these 10 Sphirot, they go according to an order: one long, one short, one in the middle. And you conduct them, and nothing conducts you. Not in the upper worlds, not in the lower worlds, not in any one of the sides. And then we said, Levushin Tikina, then there's also garments of God. Okay, this he doesn't go into. Let's go. Just one thing, actually, I skipped this. It says, you unite everything, and because you are inside of them, inside of all these Sphirot, and all these Sphirot are just garments for godliness, then anyone who separates one of them from the other of these 10 Sphirot and says it's something separate outside of you, it's like he has separated you. In other words, don't say there's God and also God's kindness and also God. That's what's wrong with worshiping the moon and with worshiping the sun. According to some opinions, if the non-Jews, they worship the moon or the sun that God creates. In other words, like going through the moon to appreciate God. There's some that say that this is, I want to call it, it's permissible, or it's not punishable, whatever. The whole world is supposed to worship only the Creator. That's for sure. Is it punishable? If there's various aspects of it, if you worship the stars or the moon that God created to show God's great. Okay, those are little nuances. That's not the goal of Hasidut, to find ways to get around the truth, right? That half truth. Ideally, the whole world is supposed to worship only the Creator of the universe, not through anything, not of the. That's what he says. Anyone who separates one of these 10 aspects, like your mercy is something separate from you, then he's separating you. Okay, but here we got. There's one long, one short here. Okay, good. So it says these 10 Sphirot, one, they go in order. One is long, one is short, one is in the middle. Oh. Okay, what does this mean? One is long, one is short, and one is in the middle. That's what we're going to get to now. Ready? Here we go. Okay, that's what it means. But onto the apikas tikuni, and you are the one that emanates these 10 Sphirot, 10 aspects. What does it mean? I want to make this bigger. You are the one that emanates these 10 aspects, God. That nevertheless, in any case, excuse me, that in any case, since, or that these lights of God, these emanations of God, they are included inside of the source. In other words, these 10 sphirot, these emanations of God, they don't go outside of God. That's what it says, that God emanates them. It doesn't mean they go outside. It's just that God hides over his oneness. And afterwards, it says, even after that, God conceals over his oneness. That was called the tzimtzum. And he puts out a kav v'chut. That's what he said, this beam of light. That's what it's hinted at in the Torah when it says that God spoke. Everything is united with God. Even that God conducts the worlds, and the worlds seem to be separate, right? There's so much diversity in the upper worlds. In the upper worlds, in the heavens, even more than in this physical world. Right? There's infinite numbers of angels, etc. It says all of the worlds are just like vessels to God. It says what in Kabbalah, it says that there's 400,000 worlds of pleasure. And in the world of Atzilut, that's above Atzilut. And then there's Atzilut. It says God and all of his life forces are totally one. Even in the vessels of God. Maybe this is below the 400,000. Maybe this is below Atzilut. In any case, there's all this diversity in each one of these dimensions. Ukamashal, like you said, Davargashvi, like it says, like something that's grasped in your thought. That your thought grasps it, right? Like we had the example yesterday. You take a stone, here we got a stone, and you can think about the stone. The stone is in your mind, but the stone is just a stone. But suddenly it becomes in your mind, it becomes like an even domim, like a mineral, they say, a material stone. So when you're thinking about the stone, so the stone is like one in your thought. The same thing is that the world, all of these creations are like the stone is one with our thought. The worlds are one with God. Even though it's an example. It's the best one we can get, but it's not the same thing because God is infinitely more real than the worlds are, incomparable to us and a stone. A stone and us are both creations, but God and the Creator, they're incomparable. But nevertheless, katzat, a little bit, mina katzat, yochalas maskil, you can understand a little bit how this world, this physical world, and all of the spiritual worlds which are above it, so to speak, which include this physical world. It says that if an angel, when there was an angel, we learned that an angel destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? An angel destroyed. That's in this week's Torah report. An angel comes and it destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's just one angel comes and it destroys a whole. It says there was a whole metropolis of like 5 different cities, right? With who knows how many people were there, millions of people, and just that's it. That's one angel. And angels are just creations. It's just a very low nothing level. If there's too much power revealed, then it can just destroy the whole entire world. You know, people are worried about what is it? Are there aliens from outer space? Here you got in the Torah talks about angels. Angels are much more scary than aliens from outer space. Here you don't have to have Roswell or whatever it is to reveal these things. Here it's written in the Torah, one angel. And the angels are nothing compared to the level which is above them, and above them, and it's infinitely powerful. When you think about this, if so, what God is, God that was the source of all these angels and is creating us. When you think about this, when you get all these metaphors and you try to sort of grasp the idea that we are just creations and God is infinitely more real than we are, and we just partake a little tiny bit of that reality. Just like there is the power and the ability of our thought to grasp a stone, for instance, which is something separate from us, how much more so is with God, that God encompasses, and you want to call it, or contains within God the whole world. That's the problem with it, because God is not a thing that the world is contained inside of him. But like a stone is inside of a thought. A thought and a stone are separate, and they're both two separate entities of the world. But God is not a separate. Okay. Nevertheless, yesh koach hamachaber. Nevertheless, we can understand that there's a physical thing can be grasped in a thought, which is more ethereal. Kach lamayla, also it is an above. God has the power to join all of these lights and these vessels, and above, everything is totally one. So don't think that because we've just finished learning about the contraction and all these 10 sphirot and the different worlds and the different levels, and these are somehow or other separate entities from God. It's not so. Everything is totally one. Which you cannot possibly understand this forever. Nifrad. Atzilut, this is what's text on 4,000. It says in Atzilut, it's 400 tet, 400,000 of pleasure. That's the world of Atzilut. And how many worlds are there in each world? It says that there's 13,000 worlds. This is just, all these are like hairs, nimim sarot. These are like hairs from God's intellect, creating the world. Also, the same thing, that God's thought can be dressed, it can be divided into in mispar, unlimited numbers of thought. Okay. So what's the Rebbe saying? The Rebbe is saying that this world is infinitely diversified and divided, and and that's just this world. And the upper worlds are in a way even more so. But the upper worlds reveal more and more godliness. Let's take an example. I'll give you another example. Let's say, for instance, you hear a symphony. You don't even know there's such a thing as an orchestra. You hear a symphony. You think, wow, what type of instrument plays that? I've heard of, a flute. What instrument? How does this guy do this? How do you play so many things? So I'll take you to, because you come and there's this one composer's name was Mahler. So he had like orchestras that were like 1,000 pieces. Like a choir was 500 people, and the orchestra was 500 people. So you hear it playing. Oh wow, there's 1,000 people there that are playing this thing. This is really amazing. Right? You look at it. But when it was in the composer's mind, there was only one. So when you hear it, it sounds like it's only one. It sounds like it's something separate. And when you come to see, you see how divided it is. And then you go to the source of it, it's really only one in the source. The same thing with us. We're in this physical world. Everything seems to be one. The world is, here it is, just a world. What about there's the heavens and the earth. The heavens are one. As soon as you start learning about it, you realize that this world is infinitely diversified. Scientists tell us about atoms and quarks. And then the spiritual worlds are even more so. That's like looking at the whole entire orchestra. But in its source, in Hashem's mind, which that's what's creating the whole thing, everything is really one. Okay. Why is the Rebbe telling us this? First of all, so we should know who we're working for, God, and what we're working for. We're working to reveal this oneness of God in the world, so that everyone feels how happy and lucky everyone will feel God's love that we're being created, and who God is that He's creating us, right? If you walk down the street and someone says to you, "Good morning, how are you?" You say, "Yeah, okay." But someone comes and says, "You know what that person was? That was, I don't know if there's anybody that's famous nowadays. I don't know. That was the king. That was the great professor. That was who knows, as soon as you think, wow, I didn't know that. That was this important person. It's totally different. When you realize that you're being created by God Himself, and that God is so big deal. So God creates the heavens, He creates the angels, He creates all this room. Okay, that's what it says about the Sphirot, that there's one long, one short, and one in the middle. Remember, that's what we learned in Petach Elio. All these 10 Sphirot can be divided into, generally speaking, these three categories. One long, here the specifically goes, one long, one short. It says, these 10 Sphirot, they go according to their order. One long, one short, and one in the middle. What is this? Here we go. Let's see. Go back. Chesed, God's kindness and love, that's called long. Why? Because it comes from above to low. God's kindness, like water that comes from a high place to a low place. God's gevura, God's power, like fire, this goes from below to above. That's what's called short. Why? Because it limits and defines how much kindness should be given to the world. Huh? So if so, when God makes these 10 sfirot, there's already included in this action and reaction from God's point of view and from our point of view. Action means God's longness, his kindness comes down into the world. Reaction, how we react to what God does, that's short, what we bring up. Then God reacts again to what we do. That's from above to below. So what happens? God creates the world and he gives us everything in the world. He gives us everything. That's called long. How do we react to that? That comes from God's aspect of gevura. That is short. That it defines how God is going to react to what we do. So if so, we see that God reacts to what do we do. That's the whole idea of God's gevura. That's why it's called short. It's called, God's kindness is called long, and God's gevura is called short. Why? Because it defines and limits how much God is going to give to us, how he's going to react. That's what it means when it says that when it says the Sodom and Gomorrah were big sinners, it says that's what God said. I'm going to go down and I will see how, according to its crying out. Its crying out is feminine. Tza'akata is feminine. That's like the aspect of gevura. Rotzilomar means God said, I will see if tza'akata, that if it's calling out, that is coming from below to above, according to that, now I will go down from above to below. God is saying, I will react to what goes on in the world. Sheyiyu shavim ha'alav amshacha. That my reaction to them will be commensurate to what they are doing. How the world is acting, that's how I will react, says God. And that's the reason we've explained all these 10 sfirot and these 10 aspects of God and all these different worlds and all these different levels to let us know that God has what's called a right side and a left side. The right side is God giving to us. The left side is how God reacts to us, what we do from below to above, that God reacts to. But according to what God gives to us, he bechinas or yosher, because that's what's called a straight light. That really, God began the whole thing. That's God's kindness. Therefore, therefore, God said, I will come down first. God said, God is creating everything, so God begins. And afterwards, it says, now let's see how they react to what I'm giving them. Then I will react to their reaction. So God creates us, and he creates everything, right? How do we react to that? So God's creating us. That's what's called his kindness. That's what's called a straight light of God. It comes down from above to below without any reckoning. Then how do we react to what God, like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, how did they react? How did they react to what God gave them? He gave them Melissa. So they did big sins. They did terrible things. So the screams were coming up. That's what comes up from below to above. The actions of this world, God takes notice of. And God reacts to that a second time. So God gives everything in the beginning. How do we react to that? Then God sees what we do with it. So that's what it means that there's one, God creates 10 sfirot. One is long, one is short, and one is in the middle. That's what we said before. Remember here? Said 10 sfirot. onto this is Chad Katsar, one is short. I'm done. Chad Arich, one is long. Chad Katsar, one is short, and one is in the middle. This is, I'm quoting Petach Eliyahu. It's like the beginning of the Zohar, the book of the Zohar. So it says, so now we know what the long pillar is. That's what God does. He gives and how he reacts to what we do. The short one is coming from below to above. That's inspiring God. That defines, so to speak, what reaction is going to come down from God afterwards. And then there's what's called the third pillar, is called not long, not short, but in the middle, intermediate. Hu Rachmanis, this is God's mercy. God's mercy is the mamutza. This is what connects between his kindness, which is unlimited, shalo, which is unlimited. One moment here. A little more. Which is unlimited, without any discerning whatsoever. God just gives. That's like how he created the world. Even though it's not proper, that's how Sodom and Gomorrah remained in existence, right? God just gave to them without any reckoning. But then there's Gevura. Gevura means that according to what came up from them, from below to above, right? The reports that God received, so to speak, from below, that would make God very angry and stop creating them or destroy them, which is that, in fact, what happened in the end. Ladun im hagon, if it's proper. What is mercy? Mercy is in the middle. Eno roy, even though the person is not fitting, so God gives him another chance. Nevertheless, you have to have mercy on him. So this little sentence, this whole episode about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's in America, it's called Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, it teaches us something very, very deep, very important. And a lot of even very religious Jews are, they oppose this idea. What does it mean? What's the idea? That God reacts to us, that we have an effect on God. And here we see the example. First of all, we saw it already with the flood, that God got angry. But you can say that maybe God just, that time came for it. Here God is saying very clearly, the cries that come up to me from above, that's what's going to determine how I come down to them. So the whole reason that we explained all these 10 sfirot and all these Kabalistic ideas and etc., and how complicated the upper worlds are, is just to explain God's personality and how it is that God reacts to what we do. That's part of his personality. That's why also, conversely, if we act good, like the Rebbe said, we have to demand the Mashiach. We have to demand that Hashem bring the Gula. We have to demand from Hashem, as those demands will be answered. That's what we pray every day. At Samach David Abdecham, and our prayers, we want that God should answer them. In fact, God always does answer them, but not exactly the way we want, and not exactly in the time that we want. But here we have an example how God reacts. God, the creator of the universe, and the Rebbe explained to us a little bit what that means, that he's creating the universe. It doesn't mean that God is some sort of a biblical figure. God is creating all of the upper worlds. Everything is just a creation, and he's doing it in order so we should recognize him and do his commandments and doing what's proper. And then God will react to what we do. Of course, that requires a lot of faith, which we inherited from Abraham. Faith, because God promised Abraham all sorts of things, and to this day, 4,000 years later, he's still not received it. Right? We didn't receive all the 10 lands that God promised Abraham, the land of Israel, and we certainly didn't receive what it says that the children of Israel will be like the stars in the heavens, and the earth, the grains of sand, the grains of dirt on the earth. We haven't received that yet, but we have certainty and trust that we will. And that trust will make God react the opposite we acted with Sodom and Gomorrah. And instead of a negative way, will be a positive way that we'll all dance together with Moshiach now. Good. Now let us learn the Devar Malchut. Here we go.